It's wildly dangerous and irresponsible for teachers to.
Welcome to Teaching While Queer, where we are providing queer folks working in education with a community to feel less alone and unload the burden of identity politics so you can work and live as your authentic self. I'm your host, Brian Stanton. My pronouns are he, they. I am a theater pedagogue and educator in New York City, and I am so pleased to have you here. Please enjoy Teaching While Queer. Through our conversation, you will gain practical strategies for making schools more inclusive. You'll understand the significance of creating supportive environments for queer students, and recognize the importance of addressing anti-queer behavior with a restorative justice approach. Hey, Tommy, how you doing today?
Doing well, and yourself?
I'm fantastic. I'm really excited to be able to spend some time with you. Thank you for taking some time out of your day to talk with me. Can you introduce yourself to everybody who's listening?
Hi, my name is Tommy Martin Edwards. I am a public school teacher in California. My pronouns are they, them. I am a trans non-binary teacher who teaches Spanish and a queer advisory class.
I love that so much. We're going to get more into that queer advisory class. Guaranteed. What was life like for you as a queer student?
I grew up in the Deep South in a time and a place where being queer wasn't really an option for anyone. It was more common if you came out of the closet, you'd hear about people being kicked out of their homes. A lot of abuse would happen and stuff. So it wasn't really a safe place to come out. And so I lived until I was in college just in the closet.
Just in the closet. Yeah, I think a lot of us have had that experience of seeing what the negative impact of coming out would be and then holding off until we were in a stable place ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
So how did those experiences inform your work in education?
I think it's really important to know that a lot of our students come from backgrounds that can be both really diverse and really beautiful, and at the same time can have a lot of challenges that we're not seeing as people who maybe grew up in the 90s and the early 2000s, even in the 80s, what life looks like for them these days. And so having a concept of where our students come from is really important in developing your teaching, in my opinion.
Absolutely. Let's talk a little bit about your advisory class, because I bet that is some work that is probably informed a little bit by your experiences. So what does a queer advisory look like?
So at our school, we have a number of what are called affinity group advisories. We have one for sports. We have one specifically focused on making sure that African-American girls that might be in different situations can achieve their best. And one of our advisories is queer advisory. So it's an advisory focused on LGBT students and allies. And we talk about queer empowerment. We talk about queer history. All of my students have to know who Marsha P. Johnson is in order to get out of the class. And at the same time, where their place is in queer society. I think a lot of us grew up feeling very isolated, where maybe the only place to find any queer community was in chat rooms and stuff like that. And I think it's really important that our students see themselves as coming from a long line of powerful warriors, if you will.
Absolutely. It's funny because when I was teaching in Texas, one of my colleagues was trying to do some work for LGBTQ plus History Month. And the problem that we ran into was she wanted to do a whole poster about Marsha P. Johnson, but was concerned about the idea of drugs and prostitution basically tarnishing all of the good work and the transformative work that she did. And unfortunately, it being in the South, just the fact that those two words could be Googled by somebody in relation to Martha P. Johnson basically stopped everything for LGBTQ History Month, because there are a lot of people who hear about the queer community and just think about sex.
Exactly. And that's their shame. So they should know about our history. They should know about Albert Cashiers. They should know about Sylvia Rivera, people that really changed history. And it wasn't just about sex, as they'd say.
Yeah, that's the thing that gets me is if you take sex out of the equation, all of these people are empowering folks who've done amazing things. And there are queer people all around the world who are empowering folks doing amazing things. If these folks over here in the corner would just stop thinking about sex, they would just see the immense joy and power that comes from these folks.
Exactly.
So you are in a school district that seems very inclusive. What are some things that you do when you actually are confronted with anti-queer behavior?
We've got policies at our schools and a really supportive administrative team. Admin are the first to jump in and help. Every now and then we have situations. I work with high schoolers. 14-year-olds are going to be 14, and you've got to just expect that they're going to learn and they're going to grow. And so we obviously have to come down really hard on things like hate speech and any kind of assaults or things like that. But at the same time, there has to be a teaching moment and a restorative moment that comes from that, so that our students understand why this was a problem instead of just being told, no, you can't say that, no, you can't do that. They have to know why it's a problem and what they can do to really make amends.
Surprisingly, in the last 3 years, you're the first person to use the word restorative. And so
Oh,
always when I
geez.
try to introduce new vocabulary, I want to make sure that we discuss it. Restorative is referring to a restorative justice approach to consequence and not really punishment, but just like understanding the consequences of your actions.
And it's about restoring from the hurt. So it's about making sure that the aggrieved party feels that they've been heard, they've been understood, and that if there's any kind of restitution or reparations that needs to come from this, that can happen. Just simply punishing someone, just suspending someone doesn't really do anything to help them learn, help them grow, help them become a better student or a better person. What really does help is having them understand where this pain came from, why this was a problem, and usually it ends with them having a much better time with the queer students at our school.
Absolutely. What I find interesting is I've seen that approach happening in the schools that I was working in Texas. And I actually had a situation where one of the students who had been presumably assaulted, she was unsure if it was actual assault or if it was an accident.
Mhm.
And she was uncomfortable with the restorative side of it. And it was interesting to hear her perspective because I don't know that I want the apology. I don't know that I want the extra things. I just want this situation addressed.
Mhm.
And it's interesting because I think that restorative justice is so necessary because it's a learning opportunity for both people and it's about sharing and it's about ensuring that we are being empathetic human beings with one another. So for me, I was a little taken aback when she was like, I don't want all of these things. And
And that's
so
her right.
have you ever been in a situation where you've had to like reassess how you're
Oh
handling
yeah,
the
you've always got
restorative
to
portion of it?
you've always got to talk to the victim in whatever situation you're in to make sure that they feel comfortable with what's happening going forward. If they just want someone to get away from them or something like that, if that's the simple ask, then that's a simple solution. What I've seen is that usually students want to be heard. They want some kind of justice to come from this. But if all they want is just, as you said with this person, just to get that guy away from me, just, I don't want to be near this anymore, then that is as much justice as needs to be doled out.
I love that. I think that's the important part is listening to the victim or listening to the person, both people involved. Listen to the people involved and assess the situation and then go from there. And I think that maybe in the situation that I'm talking about, that's where the administrators failed was in the listening portion of it. They
Yeah.
didn't listen to what her needs were. And she came to me being like, this is uncomfortable.
They
And
went by
so,
kind of playbook.
yeah. And I think that in the playbook, there needs to be remember to listen, like an asterisk.
Mhm.
Remember to listen to the victim. If you're listening, administrators and teachers, if you're handling a situation, remember to listen to the wants and needs of the victim. And that doesn't mean you have to take 100% into consideration. If they're like, expel this person and you legally can't, then like
Then you
you
legally can't.
you legally can't and you've listened and you've taken it into consideration. So, do what you can do within limits. Thinking about authenticity at work. So, what advice would you give to someone who is working in education and concerned about being their authentic self at work?
Hi, I'm Lisette Jacobson, host of the Black, Brown, and Bilingue podcast, a part of the Education Podcast Network, just like the show you're listening to now. Shows on the network are individually owned and opinions expressed may not reflect others. Find other interesting education podcasts at edupodcastnetwork.com.
A lot of it, honestly, you just got to toe the line with the law. I remember working in the Deep South as a teacher back there, and you could be fired for being LGBT. So you had to remain in the closet. You couldn't talk about your home life or anything like that. I couldn't wear my engagement ring at the time because it would lead to too many questions that could get me fired. But now I'm in a much more progressive state with a lot more robust laws, and I teach in heels, and everyone's cool with it. No one really minds anything that I do, and I talk to the parents, and they're all just like, yeah, no, that's fine. So it's all about knowing the culture of the area you're in and knowing especially what protections you have, whether that's through a union or through the legal system. If someone's just a conservative boss, you can get around that. If they have rights to hire or fire you at will, then that's a little bit more of a challenging story.
And that is much of the South, honestly. It's so frustrating because it's really, if all these teachers came together, they can't fire us all. But the mentality down here is like literally not down here. I'm not in the South anymore. But down there is that literally every position, regardless of if you're in education or not, you could be fired at any moment for any reason. And it really is the Wild West out there.
Exactly.
So
I appreciate
I'm with
being
you.
Yeah, I
You gotta
appreciate
know
being in
your
a state
laws.
with its protections
Exactly.
and a strong
What do the
union.
state protections have?
Yeah.
You have a pretty amazing program at your school. And I'm wondering if there are things that you think that either your school community or in general, this educational community can do to be more inclusive of queer people.
There's some really easy low-hanging fruit that I think every school should get on board with. We started gender support plans a number of years ago, and that's such an easy thing to make sure that your trans students are safe. And it takes one person and maybe half an hour per student. It's nothing. But
So
it really
can
helps.
you go deeper into that for those who might not know what a gender support program will look like because they're teaching in a place that's not inclusive?
A gender support plan is a document that's co-created between a student and a trusted teacher, where the student explains who they are, how they'd like to be addressed, how they'd like to navigate the school environment, and any levels of privacy they would like to establish about who gets to know this privileged information or who should be told about this information that might not be thought of immediately. Maybe a trusted teacher who's not on your schedule or something like that. And so we create a document that says, for instance, hi, this person's name is Tommy. They use these pronouns. They are out in these cases and not out in these cases, and they'd like to play women's sports. And so we take all that information down and we share it with all of the students' teachers, their support team, their counselors, their admin, our case managers. And it just makes it so that student can seamlessly exist at school. It's really stressful, I think, for a 14-year-old to be put in a position where they have to come out to 100 people in order to get the support they need. And worse, they have to remember, okay, I have to tell this person this and this person this and this person this. Instead, we as teachers can just do this on the back end. And I can message a student's entire teaching staff and make sure that on day one of school, they're named correctly, their pronouns are correct. Teachers are already watching out for things like bullying, and the student can just live their life.
I really appreciate that. It was during COVID, so there were some students on campus and there were some students who were still teaching or working. They were still at home. I'm putting students into the teacher mind frame. But their students were taking their classes online, and I had a student who came in because they had to take their statewide test. And the roster was dead naming, and I was at check-in table, and they started having an anxiety attack. And I remember sitting with them and being like, that can't be right. And just taking the pen and crossing it out and being like, what is your name? And then writing down their name. And then when my relief came, I walked with the student up to their room and I took the roster and I did the same exact thing to the roster to make sure that the student felt comfortable taking the test, because what they told me was, I just transferred from another school. I had gotten bullied. I've been online this whole time and people know me for who I am, and I don't want people to suddenly realize that I've transitioned.
Exactly.
And so the work that we do behind the scenes is so important. And the fact that you have this plan and your program has this plan that is done before the student even comes to campus for the first day of school is phenomenal, because I think that takes a lot of that anxiety away for the student, especially if they're a freshman and they're coming on campus and it's all anxiety all the time. So impressive. What are some other inclusive things? You said low hanging fruit, right? This was one of them. What are some of the others?
Simple things like if you're able to, if you live in an area with an LGBT center or anything like that, getting someone to come in and talk to your LGBT students, especially about things like sex ed. I have noticed that just across the country, our health education program does not adequately teach LGBT people about sex ed. And it's really dangerous because then you get young adults going out into the world and doing things that can really affect them for the rest of their lives.
Yep. I was talking to a science teacher who does have to teach like middle school health. And she was telling me that like she has started to create the curriculum because there's only maybe 2 curriculums nationwide that include gender expansive and sexuality expansive conversations when it comes to sex education and
Yep.
even like health. How do you take care of your body as a young transitioning trans person might be a little bit different than looking at the binary of male or female. And so she has started to just build the curriculum from her knowledge base and trying to incorporate that into her sex education and health conversations because it's not readily available. There isn't an expansive or rather there's not many options for expansive sex education.
Exactly.
In general, I don't think that they're doing heterosexual cisgender people justice in sex education either.
No, it's really hard to find good quality stuff to teach students just about their health.
Yep. We need Sue Johansson back.
Oh, it's Johansson.
Isn't that
Sorry,
this
that's
is
a
a
deep
throwback?
cut.
I
That's a
love
deep cut.
Sue Johansson. She was the best. Okay,
she
so
was.
expansive sex education and gender. Gosh, I forgot.
Gender
the-
support plans.
Gender support plans.
Our school's done a decent amount of stuff, and we've gotten hit by the right wing a few times, but we've just kept moving. I would say if you want to go further, gender expansive wardrobes at school, something so that students can find clothes that fit who they are. At our school, we both give out clothes, but also gender affirming shapewear, binders and stuff free of charge. So trans and non-binary students can get everything that they need and don't have to deal with making purchases on their own and stuff like that.
And that's so important too, because I've seen so many people become damaged from like binding inappropriately.
Exactly.
And buying a binder is not going to necessarily be in my allowance money kind of realm for a teenager
Right.
or
And
even
there's
in their comfortability to go get it.
And there's so many that are dangerous. The ones with the hooks down the side and stuff like that aren't appropriate for a human body in general. I don't know why they're still for sale. And so you have to find safe ones. You've got to educate on how to use them and stuff. GC2B, which is a binder company out of Maryland, does an amazing job of giving educational literature with their resources.
I love that. I've actually shared their link on the podcast in the past and talking about binders with another person. So this is another opportunity to just shout them out because I love the work that they're doing. It's, in my opinion, so much safer to provide not only the product, but like a little foundational education that's going to help this person as they go get more products later on in life.
Exactly.
I love that. And what I love right now also for you, it's a big step forward, is that just a week or two from this recording in the past, it became illegal to out kids.
Mhm.
at
The
school.
anti-outing bill, the anti-forced outing bill in California.
Yeah. And I think that is so powerful when you have, or so impactful because we have so many southern states who are basically creating the mandatory outing bill.
Mhm.
And
And it's really dangerous. Those
so
students,
dangerous.
you can out someone and they get home to an abusive household if they're even allowed to come home anymore. It's wildly dangerous and irresponsible for teachers to be put into that position.
Absolutely. And what's wild to me is just people who claim on one end to be protecting the children and at the same in the same mouth that they're talking about protecting the children, they're saying, but parents have rights too, and the parents need to know if this is happening, and they're potentially putting these children in danger.
I always wonder if for other situations we would be as quick to tell parents. If a student was exploring a different religion or a different political philosophy or something like that, would we be so quick to tell parents that someone's reading the gospel or something?
I saw your child with the Quran yesterday.
Exactly.
You know,
We would never do that.
no. Absolutely not. I don't know why this is such a hot topic. It's funny because I've been dealing with a lot of comments on YouTube, and many of them are like, "Get this crap off my feed," and I'm like, "Bro," namely because I have teenagers and they say "bro" to me all the time. I'm like, "Bro, you're the one searching for queer stuff.
Mhm.
That's how it ends up on your feed.
Exactly.
I didn't put it there. I wasn't like JS7292. Put it on their feed." That's a made up username. And if you have the username JS7292, I'm so sorry. But I think that's the part that's wild for me, is just how much people are focusing on this one issue. And I'm like, we're whole human beings who have whole other parts of our identity. Let it go.
Hmm.
So we've been doing some questions from our listeners, and today's question comes from George. George asks, why did you choose to work in education?
I chose to work in education because I feel like it's really important to be seen as someone like me, so that someone else who's younger knows that it's safe to dream that you're going to be something bigger, and for a lot of us, just to see that there's something on the horizon past 18.
That's the part I was missing when I was a kid.
Mhm.
I couldn't see my life after high school because there was no life for queer people, and I knew I was queer. And I grew up in the 80s, 90s, and the early 2000s, and so I came out of the AIDS epidemic and all of these queer men dying. And so that's the part that I think is so impactful, is letting someone know that not only can you live, but you can thrive after. That it's not just it gets better. It's once you get through this kind of crappy part of life, which is high school in general. Once you get through this kind of crappy part of life, not only can you have a better life, but you can have whatever most amazing life that you want to have, because you can do anything that you want, because every human being can.
Exactly.
I love that. Thank you, George, for your question. And if you would like to hear your question on the podcast, you can click the Ask a Queer Educator link on your podcast service provider. Tommy, I want to thank you so much for spending some time with me and talking to me about your experience. I appreciate you being so vulnerable and sharing about your resources, because I think that is the most impactful part of our conversation today, is practical resources and steps that schools can take. And you've really laid it out there, and I really appreciate that.
Well, thank you.
Today, we gained practical strategies for making schools more inclusive, such as incorporating queer history into the curriculum. We learned the significance of creating supportive environments for queer students, including implementing gender support plans. And we recognized the importance of addressing anti-queer behavior with a restorative justice approach, emphasizing understanding and empathy rather than just punishment. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Teaching While Queer. Connect with fellow queer educators and your favorite guests on our online community at www.teachingwhilequeer.org. New community members receive a free resource focused on creating an inclusive classroom environment. Have a great day.